What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, and today we're back talking about everybody's favorite universe, that of Warhammer 40k. And today we are also talking about another hot topic, such as the one where the Custodes killed the Primaris Marines. If you guys want to see that, link to it will be at the end of the video, so you guys can check out all that heretical goodness. But today we're talking about another instance that is really sad to see, but at the same time can also be deemed as very heretical as well. And that is when a Loyalist Space Marine chapter goes renegade. Usually when renegade Space Marines is being used, it's because they have decided to turn against the Imperium and follow the ways of chaos. That's the way that they're mostly associated, but that isn't necessarily true. A renegade Space Marine chapter can simply be a chapter that has no longer working for the benefits of the Imperium. They're no longer checking in with the Inquisition or the High Lords of Terra or any planetary governor. They are just going out into the universe on their own behalf. They're fighting for themselves, or they're fighting to protect their own system or their own battle brothers. And that in itself is choosing to go renegade, to go against the views of the Imperium. Now, the Imperium is very, very, how do I put it, divided, but at the same time, they are very, they're zealots, to put it simply. They believe something to be true no matter what, regardless of the consequences, the actual cause and effects. They are going to stick to their word even if they know they're in the wrong. And I'm going to be reading a short story from the Warhammer community that they posted about a week or two ago, and it is called Psychic Awakening, The Burden of Brotherhood. This one really hits home because when you read the passages, when you see the emotions that these Space Marines are feeling, it kind of leaves them with a sense of despair, hopelessness, that they're fighting for the wrong side. Now that in and of itself could be seen as heresy from what I'm saying. So I'll let you guys decide, but for now, let's sit tight, hit that like button and subscribe, because we will be bringing you 40k content each and every day. With that being said, let's dive into the burden of Brotherhood. Corian wrenched his gauntleted hand free from the other man's torso. The jagged, cruel-looking blades of the Power Fist's lightning claw still sparked as the remaining viscera evaporated from the weapon's ugly curved surfaces. He watched with a heavy heart as the once indomitable power-armored warrior before him collapsed to the ground, the man's body now limp and lifeless. Try as he might, he found himself unable to look away from the blood that pooled around his feet, leaking slowly from the few uncauterized wounds left in the torso of his fellow Space Marine. Bending down, Corian laid his palm upon the pauldron of his former brother. The chapter master's movements were slow and labored, in spite of his immense physical strength. He looked down at the fallen warrior, burning the image of the other man's face into his memory. Time dragged on. The chapter master, unable or unwilling to break the solemn reverie that he found himself in, as if by delaying it, he could somehow keep the spirit of the warrior before him from being lost. Rising to his feet, Corian looked between the faces of the other members of this small circle of captains and lieutenants that had been present for the ceremony. They were his inner circle, his advisors, and the few that he trusted to be privy to what had just taken place. Their expressions mirrored his own, ashen and grave, uncomfortable with what had happened, but resigned to it nonetheless. It was not the first time they had been forced to take some extreme action, and he doubted if any of them expected it to be the last. So rampant had the blight that ate away at their chapter become. He stepped away from the motionless corpse. Corian struggled to maintain his composure. To die on the battlefield was one thing. That was expected of a Space Marine. But this, on one's knees and in a darkened hold far from battle, it was not right. He stared down at the man he had once called brother, a man he had killed with his own hand, and he felt a dark malice creep over him. Every time he found himself in this place, that sensation rooted itself further and further into his soul, and it became that much harder for him to come out on the other side every single time. Powerful emotions roiled deep within the chapter master, threatening to boil up to the surface at the mildest provocation, and he struggled to get them back under control. Cathal, one of the number of captains that was present, moved forward, seemingly about to speak, yet upon making eye contact with Corian, the man held silent, retiring back to the edge of the circle. Should he say something? What would be the point? They all knew that these ceremonies had to continue. Nothing he could say would change that simple fact, and nothing he did would ever wash the stain of his brother's blood from his hands. Right now, Corian needed something, anything, and that thing was something that only the enemy could provide. Cathal and his squad of Space Marines charged headfirst onto the oncoming barrage. Crossing the rise, they cleared the open ground and were finally in amongst the heretics' lines. A chaotic melee ensued, with combat descending into a primal and disorganized crush. The enemy's sheer numbers making any kind of cohesion impossible for the Space Marines, as they hacked and slashed their way through the fanatical number of humans. Out of the corner of his eyes, Cathal saw one of his fellow warriors, Kier, approaching an intersection in the trenchworks, only to be slammed backwards from the impact of a long section of steel rebar that knocked the combat blade from his hand. The large, hulking form of an Ogren soon stomped into view, swinging his makeshift club indiscriminately and hitting friend and foe alike as it went. "Captain," Kier called out in surprise, drawing the full attention of the other Space Marine. The stench of the rag-covered creature filled the air as it rained blow after blow upon the unarmed warrior, its vast mass bellying the speed and ferocity with which it moved. Cathal struggled to make his way through the press of bodies to aid his fellow Space Marine, but for every one of the zealots he cut down, another two appeared to take its place. His chainsword had long since stopped working, the mechanism choked with chunks of bone and body matter, and the captain had resorted to using the weapon as a blunt instrument against his enemies. Cathal finally closed the distance to Kier, and the beset warrior had been knocked backwards, pinned against the sidewall of the trench. The berserker Ogren raised its weapon, ready to bring the huge slab of ferrocete down on the Space Marine's head for a final time. Fearing that he was going to be too late, Cathal immediately reached for his bolter pistol. "Brother, get down!" But before he could bring his weapon up, Kier reached out an arm towards the attacker, and a giant explosion of light seared from the Space Marine's hand. The foul mutant was immediately wreathed in a pillar of ethereal flame, screaming desperately as it tried to escape the burning agony. Rushing to Kier's side, Cathal hauled the Astartes back to his feet, the man's face a rictus of despair. "It is in me," Kier's voice sounded hollow as he spoke. "Captain, the taint has touched me." Once again we are at the battle barge, as Kier awaits the fate of so many of his battle brothers. Corian looks out at the vast bleakness spread before the inner circle. Finally, he continues and he speaks softly. "It is my responsibility, and mine alone," Corian says. "There is nothing to be gained from sharing this sin." Corian, Cathal continues on. "If you think we do not see how this wears upon your soul, you are mistaken. Why should you alone be forced to suffer through it?" Cold laughter rang out from the chapter master, the atmosphere growing noticeably tense. "Why should I suffer? Me? Let me ask you, Cathal, when I still the beating hearts of our brothers, who do you think it is that truly feels pain?" The captain did not have time to answer. before his commander continued. How many of our own people's lives have we been forced to cut short? How many of them have we led down to some dark forsaken corner of the ship before bleeding them dry? And for what? Because they dared to manifest the psychic gifts that the Emperor himself imparted to us? Is that why we must end their existence and expunge their glories from our chapter's history? Corian threw his arms wide with incredulity. Why must we hide what we are? You know how the High Lords will view such rampant manifestation of latent psychic abilities, my lord, Cathal answered him, and you know exactly what their response will be. The chapter master's eyes grew wide with intense fervor. And how does spilling the blood of our own help the Imperium? Where's the gain in that? Corian gestured out to the vista beyond the ship's exterior. Look at it. An entire galaxy filled with the weak and the shivering, the corrupt and the decadent, and all the while we fight and die? Then we have to hide what we are from them? Why? It's as if somehow the unclean and the unworthy ones is us. He turned on his captain accusingly. Kier was one of yours. You cannot tell me that you think this is right. Cathal took a step towards his chapter master, his voice rising to match the level of the other space marine. You know I do not, but think for a moment about what you are saying. If we allowed knowledge of this corruption to get out, it could damn us all. Every one of our brothers would be put to the sword if we were discovered, and you know that. Corian's anger was blunted at the pain evident in the other man's eyes. He raised a hand in apology, searching his old friend's face for a reaction. The chapter master asked him carefully, but what if there's another way? These men were everything to him. The brotherhood that was forged between a group of warriors who fought alongside one another, let alone ones who bore the same shared genetic lineage as the members of the Adeptus Astartes. They ran to the very core of who they were. These were people he would risk his life for without a moment's hesitation, and every part of him rebelled at that mere thought of what he was supposed to do. With a sharp crackling sound, the chapter master activated the power feeds that ran through his gauntlet and into the blades of the lightning claw. Kier didn't flinch at the sudden noise. The man's posture was sober and resolute, despite the knowledge of what was about to befall him. The chapter master looked down into every man's eyes in that room. In those black recesses, all he could see were the faces of each and every one of his comrades, whose lives he had been forced to cut short. Corian's fingers twitched involuntarily, causing Kier to look down, unsure of what was happening as the subtle movements sent light cascading all around the enclosed space. The continued crackling of the lightning claw fell silent as the chapter master deactivated the massive weapon, plunging the hold into near darkness once more. The faces of the assembled confidants looked up, questioningly. Corian's voice was unsteady and ragged as he tried to force out the word. No. The room was silent. Not again. The chapter master shook as he spoke, the servos of his armor grinding with sympathetic movements. Do we not bleed enough for them already? That now we must kill our own as well? Some members of the group looked to one another with concern. Corian's voice grew louder as he strengthened his posture, catching the eyes of every man in turn. I know that many of you also feel it, this thing buried deep within us, this awakening. It will take each of us in turn eventually. This, I have no doubt. There was nodding amongst the others in the room as the chapter master placed an arm on Kier's shoulder before returning to address the group as a whole. Are we to lie down and die like dogs for no other reason than the way we were made? He continued, and his voice became increasingly fervent. We are the warriors of the Adeptus Astartes. How much have we suffered and endured for the Emperor and his precious Imperium, for only for us to stand here fearing sanction, and as what? Heretics? Witches? The chapter master points at each and every person in the room. Between us, we have conquered an entire subsector, single-handedly destroying whole legions of Xenos and human alike. What do we truly have to fear? I bled for you, and you, and you, my brothers, but not for this. He pointed to the Aquila, emblazed across his chest armor. Not anymore. We are warriors, not cattle. We are the predators, not the prey. It is time we acted as such. Cathal then steps forward. And what would you have us do, my lord? Corian grasps him with both hands, as a cold smile forms as he answers. We take back our destiny, my brother. For you, for me, and every one of our comrades that have died protecting this hollow, corrupt ideology of mankind. We fight for us now. Some will resist, brother, Cathal warned quietly. What will we do then? Corian's face took on an almost fanatical zeal. Then we must enlighten them. And with that, the story comes to a close. The way it is written is just so perfect, because it really puts you in the mindset of these warriors, of these beings that were created for a single sole purpose, none other than to ascend humanity to the place that the Emperor wanted them to be. And after that, the Space Marines are to be discarded. They are just a tool in the hands of humanity. And Corian, Cathal, Kier, all of these Space Marines, they're just doing what they think is right. Because when you look at things plainly, they are fighting for something that they themselves believed at one certain point. But after they are forced to hide what they've become, hide who they really are, that's when they start to question things. The Cicatrix Maledictum, besides ripping a tear in the entire galaxy and splitting it in two, awoke many things from a lot of beings, and psychic powers began manifesting. Certain gene seed deficiencies and imperfections began to mutate into something else. And this is something that I thought wasn't an issue anymore. The Council of Nicaea occurred back before the heresy, during the 30k era, where the Emperor didn't really know what to do with all these psychic powers booming from his legions of Astartes. And some saw righteousness in using psychic powers to fight against the forces of chaos, to fight against Xenos, and to use this ability as a means to unify humanity, while others saw this as an omen. You have sorcery and magic powers corrupting the minds of the Astartes. This is too much power for a single being to hold, that this ultimate power will corrupt ultimately. And because of this, many skirmishes broke out. The council was then held to figure out if psychic powers were indeed necessary or even allowed to be used. And at the end of the day, the Imperium decided to create chaplains to monitor the use of psychic abilities, to make sure that they were only being used at certain times and certain sequences and certain actions, and that no one Astarte became too strong. No one Astarte basically used his powers for their own, only for the betterment of the Imperium. And there were a lot of Primarchs that chose one side and the other, For example, you have Mortarion, who hated psychic powers. He wanted them outlined. And on the other, you have Magnus, who truly saw the abilities of psychers as a blessing to humankind, to Astartes, for himself, that now he can actually make a difference. One person can indeed save millions because of the abilities granted by being a psyker. And when Quarian states that the High Lords won't accept this, I completely agree, even though I thought most High Lords would be okay with the use of psychic abilities. But psychic powers threaten the power of the High Lords. High Lords are just as corrupt, just as power hungry as politicians, let's say. And we all know politicians just want to stay in power. They want to have their butts stuck onto their seats and never give it up. And that's exactly what the High Lords want to do. Anything that can threaten this needs to be eliminated or dealt with as much force and power as necessary, because, again, they do not want to give up that power. So seeing these Space Marines get psychic powers out of nowhere, that is a threat, as much as it is a blessing that could, burn away the enemies with just pointing out their hands and they light up in an ethereal, ghostly flame. As awesome as that sounds, that is a huge threat if it cannot be controlled. And as we've seen with the previous story that I talked about, when the Custodes basically shot and killed the Primaris Grey Shields because of a chapter they were supposed to supplement was supposedly heretical. Just as easy as that, the Custodes can become the hand that crushes this entire chapter. So because of this, Quarian chose to turn his back on the Imperium. An Imperium that no longer welcomes them. An Imperium that is only beneficial if you listen to them at all times, regardless of what befalls you. So, I myself don't blame Quarian for choosing to go Renegade. Let me know what you guys think, because this is something that, would you have decided to follow him? Would you have stood your ground against him and chosen to side with the Imperium? Because when we look at the way things turn out for Renegade chapters, it's never good. Either they get found out and they get purged, whether it be the Inquisition, the Custodes, other Space Marine chapters, or you turn your back on the Imperium so much that you decide to use other powers, such as the Chaos Gods, and then you become a Chaos worshipping chapter. That's never good. Look at the Bad of War, probably one of the most prime examples of how turning your back to the Imperium was vastly... It essentially became a mini Horus Heresy. Like, it was such a cancerous time. All the chapters that turned against the Imperium, all the chapters that went to quell this rebellion. And look at Luft Huron now, one of the strongest Chaos Lords, all because he wanted a sector of space all to himself. If you guys want to check out the Bad of War, we do have a playlist for that. If you guys want to check out other videos on Renegades, we do have some videos as that. I will try to put them in the annotations at the end of the video so you guys can check all that stuff. And again, guys, let me know your thoughts behind this awesome story. Don't forget that the link to the story, the Warhammer community article, will be down in the description so you yourself can check out to the entirety. I read most of it, but there are other paragraphs and conversations that do go about that kind of solidify certain points a little bit more. But just the way that Corvian's speech was presented is perfect in my opinion. He proves a damn good point, and it's never great when you have to kill one of your own to hide who you really are. So, call me a heretic, but at the end of the day, Quarian knew what he was doing. Stand with your brothers before anybody else. But hey, look how far that got Garion and his Primaris Grey Shields. That's all I got for today, guys. This has been the Sound Alchemist, a part of One Mind Syndicate, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.